All right, so today we're going to really dig into this whole not giving a feck
Oh
thing.
yeah, Mark Manson.
Yeah. Have you read this book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck?
I have. Yeah, it's quite the ride.
Yeah, it's not what you expect going into it, I feel like.
Oh, not at all.
It's not just about like being apathetic and not caring about anything.
It's definitely more nuanced than that.
Yeah, it's like he takes this idea and then he kind of like,
Unpacks it.
yeah, unpacks it in this really interesting way.
Yeah, and he starts with this you know, very unexpected example. This guy Charles Bukowski.
Oh, yeah, the poet.
Yeah, the poet. He was a
Not exactly a self-help guru.
No, not at all. This guy was a
Hard drinking,
hard drinking, chain smoking.
rebellious.
Yeah, he kind of embodies everything that's like the opposite of what you think of when you think of self-improvement.
I think he worked at the post office for a long time
He did and hated it.
and wrote a book about it,
Wrote a book about it. Post office.
which he apparently like cranked out in 3 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, but the funny thing is,
He found success later in life.
right, but despite all this, he achieved success. But what's really interesting is
To Tombstone?
his tombstone.
Don't try.
I know, right? What is that about?
Like, what is the takeaway from that?
Well, that's kind of like the genius of Manson's point, right? It's not about being lazy or giving up. It's about authenticity.
So Bukowski was just being himself?
Exactly. He was unapologetically himself, flaws and all, and then that's what resonated with people.
I guess that makes sense. In a way, it's like we put so much pressure on ourselves to like,
Be more, do more, achieve more.
yeah, and it's exhausting.
Absolutely.
So how does Manson address that then?
So he talks about this thing called the feedback loop from hell.
So that sounds bad.
It's basically that spiral where you feel bad about feeling bad.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's
Yeah.
like you're anxious about a presentation and then you get anxious about being anxious about the presentation.
Exactly. And then you get anxious about being anxious about being anxious.
And it just keeps going and going.
It just keeps going.
And it's like, especially nowadays with social media, everyone's showing their highlight reel.
Oh, yeah.
So you're constantly comparing yourself to this like idealized version of everyone else.
And it's not real.
It's not real at all.
And Manson actually uses this really funny analogy about being on an acid trip and trying to walk towards a house.
Okay.
And the more he walks, the further away the house gets.
Oh my God. That's like that feeling of chasing happiness.
It is.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of like the harder you try to be happy, the further away it seems.
Yeah, you're never going to catch it.
Right. So then the question is,
If happiness isn't the goal, then what is?
that's where his idea of choosing your flex comes in.
So it's not about being indifferent to everything.
No, it's about being more selective about what you care about.
Okay, so how do you do that? How do you figure out which frecks to give and which ones to just let go?
Well, Manson uses this hilarious anecdote about this elderly woman obsessed with coupons to illustrate this point.
Oh, I think I remember this story.
Okay, so picture this. You're in a crowded grocery store, the line's like super long, and this sweet little old lady is holding everything up because her coupon isn't scanning,
And she's refusing to budge.
refusing to budge. The cashier's like practically begging her to just let it go.
And she's not having it.
Not having it.
Oh my, I can just picture it now.
Right. It's like decades of built up frustration being unleashed on this poor cashier all over like 30 cents off.
It's kind of sad in a way, right?
It is. It is. It's like her coupons are the only thing she has left to care about.
It makes you think about how our values and priorities change as we get older.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like when you're young, you care about fitting in and being popular.
And then as you get older, you're like, wait a minute, that's not actually that important.
Yeah, you start to realize that some things are just not worth stressing over.
You become more discerning about where you invest your energy.
Okay, so how do we figure out what's truly fick-worthy then?
Well, that's where Manson introduces this character called Disappointment Panda.
Disappointment panda. Wait, what is that?
Yeah, it's one of his more creative tools.
Okay, so is this like a mascot for giving up?
No, not exactly. Imagine like a panda wearing a tiny little t-shirt dispensing harsh but necessary truths.
Like what kind of truths?
Like life is a series of problems,
Mm.
not exactly warm and fuzzy.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
Right. So Disappointment Panda is all about tough love and personal growth. He's there to remind us that discomfort is part of the process.
It's not about avoiding problems, it's about solving them.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does Disappointment Panda help us solve problems?
Well, he introduces these two mindsets, the victim and the creator.
Okay, so the victim blames everyone else, and the creator takes charge.
The victim feels powerless to change their situation. The creator acknowledges the challenge but takes responsibility for finding solutions.
And this whole responsibility thing really resonates with me because of something that happened back in school. I was 13 years old, totally innocent, minding my own business at my locker.
13 years old, already getting into trouble.
No, it was the opposite of trouble.
Oh.
Out of nowhere, the principal shows up, looking all serious, and demands that I open my locker.
I have a bad feeling about this.
He starts like digging through all my stuff, my coat, my backpack, dumps everything out on the floor.
Did he find anything?
Absolutely nothing. He was convinced I had brought drugs to school.
What?
I was mortified, practically in tears, trying to explain that I had no idea what he was talking about.
Oh my God, that's awful.
Even though I was completely innocent, it left me feeling so powerless, like I had no control over the situation.
And that's a perfect example of what Manson means by you are responsible even when it's not your fault.
Right, it's about separating fault from responsibility.
Exactly.
So the principal was at fault for accusing me,
Definitely.
but I still had to decide how I was going to deal with the emotional aftermath.
You had to take responsibility for your own recovery and growth.
Exactly.
And that's a really important skill to learn because life is going to throw curveballs.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're huge.
Right.
Either way, you get to choose how you respond.
Okay, so we've got don't try, choose your folks wisely, and take responsibility.
So far, so good.
But how do we actually put this into practice in our everyday lives?
Well, that's where Manson's ideas about choosing your values come in.
Okay, tell me more about that.
He argues that the values we hold actually shape our entire experience of the world.
Interesting.
And to illustrate this, he tells this story about a man who was convinced he was too short to be loved.
Too short to be loved? What does that even mean?
I know, right? So this guy had decided that his height was the most important factor in finding a romantic partner.
And of course, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly because he was so focused on this perceived flaw that it affected his confidence, the way he interacted with women, everything.
So even if he met someone amazing,
It wouldn't matter.
he'd sabotage it because of this belief that he wasn't good enough.
It highlights the importance of choosing empowering values, right?
Totally. If this guy had valued things like kindness, humor, shared interests.
He might have had a completely different dating experience.
Okay, so how do we go about choosing the right values? The ones that will actually lead to a happier and more fulfilling life?
That's where Manson's framework for evaluating values comes in.
Okay, I like frameworks. Lay it on me.
So he poses 3 key questions that we should all be asking ourselves. And the first one is, what is the value I'm choosing? And this forces us to really get specific about what we're actually prioritizing. You know, it's easy to just say things like, I value success, but what does that actually mean?
Right, like success can mean a million different things to a million different people.
Exactly. So we have to define it in a way that's meaningful to us.
Okay, so what's the second question?
What are the metrics by which I will measure my success? And this is all about setting concrete goals that align with that chosen value.
Okay, so like if I say I value health,
Right.
how do I actually measure whether I'm living up to that value?
Exactly. Are you talking about weight loss, running a marathon, or just feeling more energetic?
Because it's easy to get caught up in these vague aspirations without actually having a way to track your progress.
Absolutely. And then the third and most crucial question is this one: would being wrong about this value create a better or worse problem for myself and others?
Okay, this one's interesting. So it's like thinking about the potential downsides of our values.
Exactly. What are the unintended consequences of holding this belief?
Because isn't a value always a good thing?
Not necessarily. Manson uses these examples of Dave Mustaine, the guy who got kicked out of Metallica.
Oh, yeah.
And Pete Best, the drummer who was replaced right before the Beatles, got huge.
Ouch. So they both experienced this major setback.
Right, but their chosen values determine their outcomes.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So Mustaine's core value became about outdoing Metallica.
Even though he went on to have his own success with Megadeth.
Yeah, but their success was his yardstick. You
Yeah.
know, he was constantly measuring himself against this wrong metric.
So even though he was objectively successful,
Right.
he still felt like a failure because he was holding on to the wrong value.
Yeah, and then you've got Pete Best, who initially struggled after being, kicked out of the biggest band in the world.
I mean, who wouldn't?
But then as he got older, his values shifted. He found happiness and family stability just enjoying playing music.
So he found a different metric for success.
Exactly. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about something more personal and fulfilling.
Okay, so we're really starting to see how these values play out in real life.
Yeah, and how they can shape our entire experience.
All right, so we've got choosing values, taking responsibility, not getting caught in that feedback loop. What else?
Well, this is where we get into the idea of uncertainty as a path to growth.
Okay, uncertainty and growth. How do those two things go together?
Well, Manson being Manson illustrates this with a story about this girlfriend he had named Erin.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about Aaron. This should be good.
So she was super into self-improvement, but in this very intense, almost dogmatic way.
Oh, I know that type.
Right? Like she was convinced she could heal Cass with energy tapping,
What?
and then she threatened suicide when they tried to break up.
Okay, that escalated quick.
It did. It did. But the point is, she was clinging to certainty.
Okay.
She had all these beliefs and wouldn't budge even when presented with evidence to the contrary.
Which closed her off to new experiences.
Exactly. And Manson argues that we should actually seek out doubt, question our assumptions, be open to being wrong.
Because being wrong means there's an opportunity to learn something new.
Exactly. It's like that childhood game of telephone, where a message gets whispered from person to person, and by the end, it's completely distorted.
Yeah, that never ends well.
Right. And Manson uses that analogy to show how unreliable our memories can be, how our perceptions are constantly being shaped and reshaped.
So if we can't even trust our own memories, how can we be so certain about anything?
Good point. Right. There's so much we don't know, so much we can't control.
So embracing uncertainty is about accepting that and being open to new possibilities.
Exactly. And that's especially important when it comes to relationships.
Okay,
Well, Manson has some pretty interesting views on love, and he starts by dissecting one of the most famous love stories of all time, Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet, that's like the ultimate love story, right?
Well, that's what we're taught to believe, but Manson challenges that.
Okay, how so?
Let's be real. These two, they meet at a party, get married the next day, and then kill themselves over a series of miscommunications.
Not exactly a healthy model for modern relationships.
Not at all.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it does sound a bit absurd.
Right. And Manson uses this to introduce the concept of boundaries in relationships.
So what's his take on that?
He argues that unhealthy love is often about two people trying to escape their own problems through each other.
Oh, so it's like a codependent dynamic.
Exactly, where each person relies on the other for their emotional fulfillment.
Instead of dealing with their own issues?
Right, they get lost in this like whirlwind of intense emotions.
Which isn't sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. Healthy love, on the other hand, is about two individuals who acknowledge their own problems.
And support each other through the process of growth.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility for your own emotional well-being.
And respecting your partner's boundaries.
Yes. And those boundaries are crucial.
Okay, so how does Manson define boundaries?
They're like the lines between what you are responsible for and what your partner is responsible for.
So it's about recognizing that you can't fix your partner's problems.
And they can't fix yours.
Right? You each have to do your own work.
That's right.
So what are some examples of what poor boundaries might look like in a relationship?
Things like blaming your partner for your bad mood, trying to control their behavior because you're insecure.
Or constantly needing reassurance from them.
Yeah, or the opposite, taking responsibility for your partner's emotions and actions, even when it's not healthy.
Right, it's about finding that balance.
Exactly, between supporting each other and maintaining your own sense of self.
This makes me think about trust. Manson also talks about how to rebuild trust when it's been broken, especially in cases of infidelity.
Yeah, and he suggests this two-step process.
Okay, what's the first step?
The person who broke the trust needs to acknowledge the values that led to their actions.
So it's not enough to just apologize.
It's not enough they have to understand why they did what they did.
Okay, so like if someone cheats,
Yeah,
they need to figure out what underlying issues contributed to that decision.
exactly. And then just as importantly, they have to build a track record of improved behavior.
So it's about showing through consistent actions that their values have shifted.
And that they're committed to earning back that trust.
Which takes time and effort.
It does, especially after a major breach.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Choosing values, taking responsibility, boundaries, uncertainty.
And we haven't even gotten to the good stuff yet.
There's more.
There's more, in healthy relationships, we can still get caught up in this pursuit of more.
More experiences, more possessions, more options.
More.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
It is. You're always looking for the next best thing, never fully appreciating what you already have.
I've totally been there.
And that's where Manson's concept of commitment comes in.
Commitment.
It might seem counterintuitive, but he argues that by focusing on a few truly important things, we actually experience more freedom.
So less is more.
Exactly. He connects this to the paradox of choice.
Oh yeah, the idea that having too many options can actually lead to like dissatisfaction and anxiety.
Exactly. So by limiting our options and committing to a few key things, like a relationship, a career, a creative pursuit,
We free ourselves from that mental clutter.
and actually experience more fulfillment.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
Right. It's about recognizing that more doesn't always equal better, and that sometimes the most rewarding experiences come from investing deeply in what we already have.
Okay, so how does Manson illustrate this idea?
Well, he shares some personal anecdotes, starting with his early years of excessive travel.
Oh yeah, he was kind of a nomad for a while, wasn't he?
He was, and he talks about that initial thrill of, exploring new cultures,
Yeah.
but how it eventually became this kind of superficial pursuit.
Like he was constantly chasing the next adventure, but not really connecting with anything on a deeper level.
It's like that feeling of being busy but not actually accomplishing anything meaningful.
Right. Like you're checking things off your list, but you're not really living.
Exactly. It's a common trap in our hyper-connected world. We're constantly bombarded with these messages to optimize our lives, do more, experience more.
But in the process, we can lose sight of what truly matters.
Exactly.
Okay, so what was Manson's turning point? How did he break free from that cycle?
He found it in a surprising place, St. Petersburg, Russia.
Russia.
Yeah, he was initially put off by the bluntness of Russian culture, the lack of social niceties.
Yeah, they're known for their directness.
Right, but as Manson adjusted, he began to appreciate it as a form of unadulterated honesty.
Like they say what they mean. No sugarcoating.
Exactly. And it was refreshing for him to be in an environment where people were so straightforward.
It sounds liberating in a way.
It was, and that experience helped him realize the power of commitment. By choosing to commit to a certain way of life, a relationship, a set of values.
He found a deeper sense of freedom and self-expression.
Exactly. And it all leads us to this ultimate, inescapable reality that shapes all of our choices and values.
Are we talking about death?
We're talking about death.
Yeah, it is kind of a heavy topic, but it feels like it's all been building up to this.
Yeah. I mean, death is the one thing we all have in common, right?
It's the great equalizer, as they say.
Exactly. And Manson argues that confronting that reality can actually be a powerful way to live a more meaningful life.
Okay, I'm curious to hear where he goes with this.
So he tells this really personal story about losing a close friend when he was just 19.
Oh, wow.
He and his friend Josh were at a party at this lake house, one of those carefree summer nights,
Yeah, I can picture it.
music, swimming, that feeling of endless possibility.
The kind of night you wish you could bottle up and revisit.
Exactly. And they were having one of those deep conversations, the kind you only seem to have when you're young and feeling invincible.
About life and truth and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And at some point, Josh decided to jump off this cliff into the lake.
Oh, no.
It was something everyone was doing. It seemed harmless.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for Manson.
It was devastating. He talks about going through a deep depression that summer, grappling with the grief, the guilt, the shock of it all.
And this is where his point about death giving life meaning really comes through, right?
Absolutely. In the midst of all that darkness, he had this realization, if death is inevitable, then why waste time being afraid to live?
It's like his friend's death, as tragic as it was, became a catalyst for him to really start living.
Yeah, like a wake-up call. And
Yeah.
it's here that he brings in the work of this anthropologist, Ernest Becker.
Ernest Becker, I'm not familiar with him.
So Becker wrote a lot about death anxiety,
Okay.
and he argued that a lot of human behavior is driven by this deep-seated fear of death, what he called death terror.
Death terror, that's pretty intense.
It is, and to cope with that terror, we create these things he called immortality projects.
Immortality projects. What are those?
Basically, they're the things we do to try and transcend our physical limitations and leave a lasting mark on the world.
So like building a successful career, having children, creating art.
Exactly. Anything that gives us a sense of purpose and meaning beyond our own lifespan
So our values, the things we care about most deeply.
are often connected to this desire to leave a legacy.
It's kind of a bleak way to look at it, but I get it. We're all searching for meaning.
We're trying to make our existence feel significant.
And there's nothing inherently wrong with that.
No, but Becker and Manson both urge us to be conscious of those motivations,
Right.
to examine our values and make sure they're truly serving us.
Because if we're not careful, our immortality projects can become unhealthy obsessions.
Exactly. We can get so caught up in chasing external validation, achieving success, leaving a legacy.
That we forget to actually live our lives.
It's like we're so focused on the destination that we miss the journey.
So how do we find that balance?
It's about accepting the reality of our own finitude while still striving to make a positive impact on the world.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that brings us to the question of legacy, what we leave behind when we're gone.
Which can be a scary thought.
It can be, and Manson uses this powerful metaphor to illustrate this point standing on the edge of a cliff at the Cape of Good Hope.
Wow. I've always wanted to go there.
It's a pretty incredible place, and it's that feeling of vastness, staring into the unknown.
Yeah.
And it prompts us to ask, what will our impact be? What will we leave behind?
What will people remember us for?
And Manson makes this really important point about not equating attention with greatness.
Just because someone's famous doesn't mean they've actually made a difference.
Exactly. It's about choosing values that are bigger than ourselves.
Values that contribute to something greater.
Yeah, leaving the world a little bit better than we found it.
It's about making a difference.
Exactly.
As I think about all these ideas from don't try to choosing our frex to taking responsibility to the inevitability of death.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but it really comes back to the central message of choosing what matters to us, even in the face of our own mortality.
Yeah, like what are you going to give a fuck about?
It's not about achieving some grand Instagram-worthy feat. It's about living with intention, finding joy in the simple things, and making choices that align with our values.
That's beautifully said.
And that peace comes from recognizing that we're already enough, just as we are.
We don't need to achieve some mythical state of perfection to be worthy of love or happiness.
We're all perfectly imperfect.
Stumbling through this thing called life, doing the best we can.
And that's more than enough.
It really is.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the mind of Mark Manson.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have from the absurdity of chasing happiness to the power of choosing our values, from the importance of taking responsibility to the liberating nature of commitment, and of course the inevitability of death.
And the legacy we choose to leave behind.
It's been a journey.
It has, and hopefully you've surfaced with some new insights, maybe even a few questions to ponder.
Remember, it's not about having all the answers.
It's about being curious, challenging your assumptions, and embracing the messy, beautiful journey of life.
And most importantly, remember that you are already great simply by being here, by choosing to engage with the world, and by striving to make it a little bit better, one fuck at a time.